So I'm here today with Rabbi Pini Dunner, a senior rabbi from Beverly Hills and president of Iron Initiative. He's led dozens of protests against Qatari assets in the U.S. and in Europe since October 7th, becoming one of the most prominent voices against Qatar's influence in the West. And I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV, and I welcome you back to our ILTV News Podcast. And welcome to you.
Thank you, Maayan. Thank you for having me on your program.
Of course. Now, Rabbi Dunner, you have said that Qatar is the greatest threat to Israel and the West, even more so than Iran. That's a pretty bold statement, especially given, the news how close Iran is to a nuclear weapon. Can you walk us through how you reached this conclusion and why you believe that so few others are either today saying it out loud, let our prime minister being one of them, and certainly up until now didn't even recognize the threat?
So there's lots to unpack in what you've just said.
Okay.
The first thing is Iran is a grave threat to Israel. So the reason I'm making the comparison is not to in any way diminish the threat from Iran. Mm-hmm. But everybody knows that Iran is a threat. It's like saying Russia is a threat to the West. We know that Russia is a threat to the West. But when you suddenly hear about a friend being a threat, that becomes much more threatening because the people within who threaten are always much more dangerous. They say in the mafia, if a friend of yours calls you to a meeting that you weren't expecting, wear a bulletproof vest. Qatar is meant to be a great friend of the West. And CENTCOM, which is the largest U.S. military base outside of the United States, is located in Qatar. So officially, they're a non-NATO ally. They are an ally of the West in every possible respect, not just the United States. They do business in the West. We're going to, I'm sure, touch on that. And therefore, to know that they are so threatening is in and of itself hugely important and makes them more threatening than somebody you know and treat as an enemy. Even to this day, I think in Israel, there's a lack of awareness that Qatar poses this grave threat to Israel.
Yeah, I would say certainly, right? It was just Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I think it was just last week, was trying to say, no, Qatar is very helpful to us in many ways.
Yes, that's right. Or it's a complex situation, he said, whatever the words were that he used. Yeah. So now let me tell you how they've gained this position. Okay. And that is through money. My father used to say 90% of the world's problems have got to do with money, and the other 10% have also got to do with money, right? They have so much money. Yeah. This is a country which is tiny. There's 300,000 citizens. I read a statistic just last week. 91% of the workforce in Qatar are non-Qataris. Do you hear that number? 91%. That means most Qataris don't work. They just get money for being citizens of the country. It's controlled by a tiny family, the Al Thani family. That's the Emirs family. We'll talk about them as well. They are hugely wealthy. There's 6,000 Al Thanis, of whom maybe about 100 control the family business, which is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, private businesses related to the family, and the Qatar Foundation. These are three branches of Qatar. Okay. It's all money which they make. It's petrodollars, right? Mm-hmm. It's natural gas and some oil, income that they get, revenue that they get. Essentially, they are in control of, let's call it $1 trillion. It's huge. It's a huge sum of money, and they invest it wisely. Since the last crisis that Qatar experienced, which was during the first term of President Trump, 2017, the Saudis went against the Qataris. The Qataris have spent $250 million in lobbying alone in the United States, just lobbying. I'm not talking about the money they've spent on university campuses. I'm not talking about the money that they've spent bribing individual politicians and thought leaders. Tucker Carlson doesn't defend Qatar for nothing. Mm-hmm. This is not a guy who likes foreign actors. The reason why he is so buddy with and so friendly, chummy with Qatar is because he gets money for it.
Is that proven?
I don't know if it's proven. I'm telling you, it's whether it's proven or not, and whether he admits it or not. Mm-hmm. The fact that he went to interview the Prime Minister of Qatar, and he has nothing good to say about anybody who's not a United States citizen. Mm-hmm. And yet he's so chummy with Putin and with Qatar. It just tells you everything you need to know about actors like him. He's an influencer. He's got millions of people who are watching his programs. Of course, it's to do with money. There's senators on their payroll. There are congressmen on the payroll. I'm going to tell you one just brief anecdote. Okay. I was recently lobbying in Washington, D.C. about a month ago.
Against Qatar?
Against Qatar. And I have meetings with congressmen and with senators, and it's not hard to arrange the meetings. Yeah. And one particular congressman, I was meant to meet him in the evening, couldn't get to him because there was a budget debate, and there was a bit of a problem is that Trump couldn't get all the Congress to vote for whatever the budget was going to be. I can't remember the details. And the congressman couldn't meet me, so I met with his chief of staff, and slowly it became evident that I wasn't going to meet the congressman. And the chief of staff said, what are you here to talk about? What's the topic of discussion? I said, I'm here to talk to him about the dangers posed to the United States by Qatar. How interesting, he said to me. I was in Doha last week with another 20 staffers from Washington. Now, let me tell you how significant that is. A staffer is the most important person in a congressman's office.
Because they give the advice.
They're the ones who put the papers, the talking points in front of the congressman. They haven't got time to do all the research.
Of course.
Now, that is not registered. Nobody registers as a staffer. I went to Doha on a full paid trip. He said it's the most exciting, amazing week I've ever had in my life.
Oh, wow.
It's registered nowhere. Now, I know that AIPAC is an amazing organization, brings congressmen to Israel, etc. Mm-hmm. Last year, AIPAC spent $3.3 million lobbying in whatever it costs them to do the work that they do in Washington, D.C. How can you compare? It's a drop in the bucket compared to what Qatar is spending and can spend. So there's no way we can outspend the amount of money they have put in to protecting their image, creating this brand of Qatar being a neutral mediator, of being somehow, they call themselves the honest brokers of the Middle East. There's nothing more dishonest than Qatar. They present themselves as friends, as charming, as sophisticated, as wanting to do the best for all the people they have to do with. They are an insidious, pernicious bunch of people that are sowing discord, and now we've discovered even here in Israel.
Right. Now, for sure. Now, I mean, you have led protests, as we mentioned at the beginning, in the U.S. and Europe against Qatar and tried to raise awareness. Most of the time, at least for many, many years, people were not listening. I'm wondering, you told me this story now about the staffers. It's quite interesting. Are there another shocking piece of information that you learned about Qatar from another Western leader that just will blow us away?
So, yes, the answer is absolutely.
So maybe share.
I'll tell you. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I was in London. I protested outside Claridge's. Mm-hmm. So Claridge's is owned by a private corporation called the Mayborn Group, and that's owned by two people. One is called HBK. He's the former emir of Qatar. He's the father of the current emir. And his first cousin, who's the former prime minister of Qatar, he's called HBJ. HBK and HBJ, I mean, they've got longer names, Arabic names, which I'm not going to bore you with, but you can look them up, and these are two vile, vicious villains. Okay. I was protesting outside Claridge's, and I speak to a lot of people. And I've got friends in the British government, and I've got friends in as it were, in leading places in the UK, in business and in industry and wherever. Some months ago, as in the lead up to my activities in London, I spoke to somebody who I've known for many years, who was a minister in the Conservative government. He's not a minister anymore. And I said to him, the truth is the British government should be sanctioning Qatar.
Okay.
And they should be confiscating the assets. What happened to Roman Abramovich? Chelsea was taken away, right?
Right.
Why? Because Putin, his friend, invaded Ukraine. Mm-hmm. These are people who are hosting Hamas. They clearly had advance notice of October 7th. They were funding Hamas in cash money, $30 million a month they were bringing in suitcases. And I know that the Israelis knew about it, but the Israelis were doing it in a kind of blackmail. They were being blackmailed, right? We'll buy you peace if we can give money to Hamas. But meanwhile, Qatar knew that they weren't buying peace because of what was going to happen. So Qatar is deeply embedded and involved in terrorism. You should sanction their assets. Claridge's Hotel, for example, Harrods, Heathrow Airport, 20% owned by Qatar. British Airways, owned by Qatar. 20% of the London Stock Exchange, owned by Qatar. Sainsbury's, one of the largest supermarkets in the UK, owned by Qatar. You're talking about a huge amount of assets. I said, why don't you confiscate them? He told me this, this is the line, this is the shock that you're waiting for.
Okay.
It would be more difficult to extricate the UK from its relationship with Qatar than Brexit. Wow. That was the line. He said, don't even start, don't go there, we cannot do it. It's not happening.
Do you think that Qatar could have gotten our hostages out if they wanted to?
We know that for sure. Well, we know it for a fact. And what we know is now, because it came out 3 months ago, is that they actually got into a relationship with the hostage families as a way of creating division between the Israeli government and negotiators and the families, so that they could say, listen, we're trying our best. Even the hostage families are saying that we're doing our best. But in the meantime, they've done nothing. I think the first week after October 7th, by the way, on October 7th, Qatar issued a condemnation of Israel.
Right, I wanted to go back to that next.
A condemnation of Israel. So that first week, if the Biden administration would have said to Qatar, you know what, unless those hostages are home, within the next 48 hours, we are going to begin dismantling CENTCOM and we're going to move it to UAE. Mm-hmm. Merely saying that would have meant that the hostages would have come home, because their contact at that stage, the war hadn't started. Right. At that stage, they were in direct contact with the leaders of Hamas, both in Doha and Sinwar, right? In Gaza itself. They would have said, listen, guys, you did what you did. We'll sort this all out later. Those hostages need to go back to Israel. However we're going to, maybe you'll get some prisoners back. They need to go back to Israel. They never did it. So that the way they see it is they're on the side of the terrorists. They're not neutral. Mm-hmm. The longer this drags on and the more time hostages remain in Gaza, the more concessions Israel will be forced to make, and the more the world will go on the Palestinian Islamic radical side. Mm-hmm. So you've got people in America who are protesting and saying Hamas is great, right? So that wouldn't have happened had the hostages been released the week after October 7th.
But, going back to October 7th, and it feels just like yesterday, and yet it's 18 months ago, which is
it's shocking.
It's shocking. But you're right. Qatar condemned Israel. And something you said before, which I think is very interesting and probably very true, was Qatar probably knew about October 7th. They knew Hamas was going to attack us. Why do you think it is that for 18 months, the United States, Israel, the world has used Qatar as the chief negotiator between Hamas and Israel, when the side was so clear, probably before, but certainly on October 7th?
There was a movie that came out many years ago called The Usual Suspects. I can't remember if it was a strapline for the movie or if it was something that the main actor said, was that the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince everybody he doesn't exist. Qatar has convinced the world that they're not the devil. And it almost doesn't matter what they do. It almost doesn't matter how far they push the envelope. Everybody is still completely either willfully stupid or willfully ignorant or stupidly ignorant, right? Either they've been paid off to say, no, Qatar's not that bad, or they just simply don't believe it. I mean, how many more things do Qatar have to do in order to convince us? They have slaves in Qatar. They built the stadiums for the World Cup using slave labor. Absolutely proven fact. It's out there. It's open source information.
Okay.
They bribed the World Cup, committee in order to obtain the World Cup. It's all proven. It's information. It's ongoing. They keep on arresting people. It's absolutely out there. They are they are villains in business. They cheat their own business partners. They'll go into a business relationship with somebody, and then one day they'll say, sorry, we're not paying you, or you're not going to get your share. What are you going to do? You're going to sue a trillionaire? It's not possible. These are people who on every front, and it's all out there. It's all open source information. They absolutely knew about it. Now, this is interesting. I don't know if you recall, in the 2 or 3 months leading up to October 7th, there was a sudden blip in the relationship between Qatar and Hamas. And for a couple of months, Hamas didn't get their $30 million.
Okay.
There is a suspicion that there was a disagreement as to how the October 7th attack would occur, and that Qatar was perhaps pulling back and was saying to maybe hold on, we need to get Iran aligned, we need to get Hezbollah aligned. That was the big thing, is that now we know is that Hezbollah had not been warned about October 7th, and they reacted to October 7th. And the same with Iran, they weren't given the information as to when the October 7th attack was going to occur. And maybe that was the blip in the relationship between Hamas and Qatar. But what we certainly know is that they received money for equipment, that the tunnels that were built underground were paid for with Qatari money. We know that for a fact. It didn't come from Iran. That as much money as Iran has put in to Gaza, Qatar put in much, much more. They have been the backbone. They have been the foundation. They have been the platform for Hamas to operate in Gaza. And they played the Israeli system. They did it brilliantly. They played the Israeli system. They managed to insinuate themselves into the Israeli system so that somehow Bibi Netanyahu thought, actually, we're playing off Fatah and Hamas, and that we can keep, divide and rule. They didn't realize that what they thought was tactical brilliance was the result of Qatari strategy to undermine Israel and to create this possibility for Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th. Qatar is the root of the evil that we're now seeing unfold around the world. It's not just in Israel. Now, you've just suddenly discovered it here in Israel. Right. But actually, this has been going on around the world. They've seeded all these Islamic fundamentalist groups in the West, all these encampments in college campuses that sprung up seemingly out of nowhere. Immediately after October 7th, all these thousands of people that gathered in Times Square on the day after October 7th, where do you think that came from? Of course it came from Qatar. So this is a grand strategy, a grand plan to undermine Israel. It's part of their love of the Muslim Brotherhood, part of their love of Islamic fundamentalism, and it starts at the top with the Al-Thani family.
So I want to jump us back to Israel, though, for a minute, because you mentioned how we're just learning about this. And Qatargate is like this huge deal, obviously going on. We're investigating it. Everyone's in Israel internally keeps focusing on the Prime Minister's office, but we probably know that it's not just there. What is it in the mainstream media is missing here that is fundamental to the story, that if they understood it, that they would realize how much bigger this is than a couple of aides of Netanyahu's?
I think it's a huge story, and it's really important. The way I would analogize it is to say if somebody is starving and they go into a shop and they steal food, they need to be arrested. They need to be punished for stealing. It's important because we can't have crime.
Right.
You need to deal with crime. But you also need to investigate, why is this person hungry? Why is he being forced to steal? Mm-hmm. That's also hugely important. In fact, it may be more important because there's a reason. There's some reason as to why this person has got to the stage where they feel they need to steal bread from a shop.
Right. Makes sense.
I think that the media here and the political class in Israel is very focused on Bibi, either because they're extremely supportive of him or because they hate his guts.
Right.
I think this does need to be investigated, and clearly things have happened which should not have happened, and it's right at the heart of the administration, of the Israeli administration. It's a disaster.
But is it just the Israeli administration? I want you to finish, but as you're saying your answer, is it just the Israeli administration, or is it all levels of Israeli society? I mean, usually
one must suspect it's all levels,
right? Because the IDF and the government to have the same storyline, to both believe that Hamas was not as much of a threat as it was. When the intelligence was there, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense.
Correct.
Okay, the government felt this way.
I think
Qatar.
You're absolutely right.
So IDF felt this way. Qatar, fine, but it can't be that they both, unless they were both being told the same story.
Somehow, they have managed to create allies wherever they go. So whether it's in Senate and Congress and in the White House, or whether it's in Israeli government, it's unbelievable to think about it, but they've managed to find allies in every single branch of government. And don't believe for one second that had Yair Lapid or any of the other people been prime minister, that it wouldn't somehow have been them as well. That you'll discover as time unfolds that there's people in their circles who've also been paid off by Qatar.
Right, opposition and
absolutely,
coalition.
they work with everybody. They work with Republicans and Democrats, so they're going to work with Likud people and opposition people. It makes no difference to them because they're not your friend. They're using you as a way of getting their agenda served. They're serving their agenda, whoever they pay off. Mm-hmm. what I'm saying is, and this is really the point I'm getting to, is the story is not Bibi Netanyahu. And I know that everybody in Israel loves the story to be about Bibi Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu and how terrible it is. They've been in power for so long and look what they've done to the country. I know, I get it. I don't live here. I do get it. But the story is about Qatar. It's not about Bibi. The villain here is, and that really needs to be investigated much more strongly by the media. And I know that, there's been mutterings of this on sort of the sidelines and podcasts, etc. The mainstream media really needs to say, get together and say, come on, guys. Bibi may have done something wrong, or maybe the people around him did something wrong, or whatever he knew or he didn't know. Let's investigate it. We'll get to that. Qatar is in the heart of our country. Right. Qatar is right here. They're the enemy. Bibi's not the enemy of Israel. He thinks he's doing the best for Israel, and he is, in the way he understands, doing his best for Israel. The fact that they have managed to buy off people around him, potentially, allegedly, isn't that a complete disaster for this country? If they've, as you've suggested, bought off people in the IDF, if they've bought off people at the highest levels of business leadership,
the Shin Bet.
And the Shin Bet. I mean, what is going on? Can you imagine Iran doing that? It's inconceivable. And yet here it is. Qatar is somehow not considered a threat, and they've done it. They've somehow inserted themselves, insinuated themselves into the heart of Israel. That's the story. That's the story.
And you mentioned before that this leader in the UK said to you it would be easier to do Brexit than to separate from Qatar. Do you think it's at that level already here in the state of Israel?
Potentially. We don't know. We're right at the beginning here. We're right at the beginning. I think there's a big difference here is that they don't own assets.
Okay, we know for sure.
I've never heard that they've owned, we may discover that they do through subsidiaries, but I'm not aware that Qatar owns assets in Israel. So somehow, if you root out the people who are on Qatar's payroll, somehow those people with a relationship, and it'll be extremely hard because they've got a lot of money and you'll find they have huge influence. Look at the people who've been arrested out of Bibi's office. These are people with, incredible access. Yeah. The access that these people have is huge. Yeah. And they are a voice. They're whispering in your ear. If you're, they are probably, they're not at the cabinet table, but they're at cabinet meetings. Yeah. And something comes up about Qatar. No, we spoke last week to the guy from Qatar. He says he's dealing with it. That's all they need to do. And that completely changes the narrative of the meeting. The whole atmosphere of the meeting changes with regard to Qatar. Whereas if they weren't saying that, maybe Qatar would have be treated more harshly in terms of the negotiations for the hostage releases.
So let's talk about that for a minute, the negotiations. There are many people that say, we can't afford to alienate Qatar right now. And so they're sort of walking on eggshells, keeping Qatar in the mix. But truthfully, it is 18 months. These 59 hostages are still there. Yeah. So is that the right response? How do you respond to these people? Is there anything at this stage we could do? Or is that true? We still need Qatar.
I'll tell you a story that happened to me. So very soon after October 7th, on October 13th, 2023, I wrote a letter to Beverly Hills City Council. I'm the rabbi in Beverly Hills. And I said to them, the Mayborn Hotel, which is an iconic hotel in Beverly Hills, is owned by HBJ and HBK. We must do everything we can to remove these people from our city. They support terrorism, etc. Okay. I sent them the letter, didn't get much of a response, began to organize protests outside the Mayborn Hotel. I've since protested there many times, also outside HBJ has an 8-acre estate in Bel Air. I have, he's not been back. He's not been back since October 7th, 2023, because he knows there's somebody who's raised his voice. Together with others, we have a group called Iron Initiative, where we do spot protests wherever we can, because we want to raise awareness about Qatar. And it's amazing. We have papers that we hand out to people just walking past. Qatar, never heard of it. They've never heard. They couldn't place it on the map. Wow. Or, they've never heard of Qatar. They wouldn't know that the Mayborn Hotel is owned by Qatar. It's a beautiful hotel. It's a 5-star luxury hotel in the heart of Beverly Hills. Okay, so I did that. A week later, I get a call. I'm not going to tell you from who, but it's a name that people are familiar with. A call from somebody who's part of the negotiating team in Doha. He says, your name came up in Doha. I was like, how interesting. Why would my name come up in Doha? He said, they asked us, why is it that your people are protesting outside our assets in the West? Don't know what you're talking about. Rabbi Dunner in Beverly Hills is protesting outside the Mayborn Hotel. Really? We've got nothing to do with Rabbi Dunner. So I said to the guy who called me, I said, are you telling me to stop? Is this a bad thing? He says, no, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. If only more people were doing it. So this is obviously somebody not on the payroll,
right,
who had the sense that the fact that they were sensitive to negative publicity could be a good thing in terms of negotiations. I know much more than that since then. First of all, they tried to bribe me. So they sent somebody, a friend of, absolutely, they sent a friend of mine to offer me a full expenses paid trip to Doha so that they could explain their position and that we could reach an arrangement, etc. I said to the guy, I don't want to end up like Khashoggi. I want to come out in one piece. Actually, what I said to them was, I'm willing to come to Doha if I can give an interview like I'm doing with you on Al Jazeera and say the things I'm saying to you and I've said to so many journalists on Al Jazeera. And the program goes out on both the Arabic language one with subtitles that I've checked in advance and the English language Al Jazeera before my visit. If after my visit I'm convinced that all the things I've said on the interview are not true, we'll do another interview. I guess what? I never heard from them again. Since then, they've hacked my emails. They've tried everything they can to undermine me. They've threatened me with news stories through journalists. They always find other people. They don't do it themselves. They want to cause harm to anybody who does anything negative about their image. Their brand is hugely important to them.
How are you defending yourself against this entire rich country? Like, why hasn't this worked, what they're trying to do to you?
I don't know the answer. I'm guessing that many people do fall into the trap. I know people who did go to Doha, and we've just heard about a staffer, right? But I've had friends who've unfortunately fallen into their trap, and money is very attractive to people who don't have it. I knew about Qatar before October 7th. To some extent, I realized how dreadful they were. Never really did much about it. After October 7th, I can't live with myself. What can I do as a rabbi in Beverly Hills? I have a son who fought in the commandos. He was on 457 days of active service after October 7th in Unit 98, 98th Brigade, I think it is, right? And he served in Gaza, he served in Lebanon, he served in Syria, and now he's just come out. So I know what he does to defend Israel after October 7th. Him I'm completely aware of. What am I doing? What can I do in Beverly Hills? Yeah. So my role has to be to raise awareness about something which I think is causing great harm to Israel and the case for Israel, the hostages. So I'm alone. I've got a few dozen people who come with me to protests, the Iron Initiative, which I've created to raise awareness and to do these spot protests where we're needed. Anti-Semitism on UCLA campus and wherever we can go. But, there's too few of me and too many of those who've taken Qatar's money.
Yeah. So, you often speak in terms of moral clarity. And what do you think is the moral obligation then of Jewish and Christian leaders right now when it comes to exposing this truth about Qatar? Should more people be like you?
I appeal to anybody who's watching this, who's thinking to themselves, why am I watching Rabbi Dunner from Beverly Hills talking to Maayan?
Well, I'm enjoying it.
I know you're enjoying it, but there's a lot of people watching this program who are interested, perhaps just to watch. Don't be a watcher. Don't be a viewer. Be an activist. Do something. Whatever you can do. Find out, is there a Qatari asset near you? Get in touch with me, but I'm not difficult to reach. I have a website, rabbidunner.com.
It's not been hacked yet.
It's not yet. If it is, maybe now I'll know why. But please, get in touch with me. I will make sure that I find something for you to do which can raise awareness about Qatar's pernicious, insidious role in the destruction of the West. It's as grand as that. And, I spoke, I'll end with this. I spoke a few weeks ago, Stand With Us, had a conference, international conference in Los Angeles. It was Friday night. It was just before Purim. And I got up. It was no microphone. I'm an Orthodox rabbi. Stood up on the table, got everyone quiet, and I said, what are we doing here? The Shabbat before Purim, you're 600, 700 students from across the world. And you're all ambassadors for Stand With Us in environments that can be extremely hostile. I want to tell you something. There were two people in the story of Esther. There was Mordechai and Esther. Who was Mordechai? I forget what the Midrash says. Who was Mordechai? He was a doorman. Right. He was a doorman. Maybe he was the doorman in the palace, but he's still the doorman, right? Who was Esther? She was an orphan. She was a nobody. She didn't even know her parents. She lived with her cousin. She was a Nebuch. She became the queen, and he saved the Jewish people with her help. Two Nebuchs. Two people who might have said to themselves, what can we do? We're nobody. We can achieve nothing. I said, I'm not suggesting for a moment that anybody in this room, in the Stand With Us conference, is a doorman or an orphan or a Nebuch. But you may think of yourself in those terms with respect to what you can achieve for Israel. Not at all. Every one of you is an Esther, and every one of you is a Mordechai. You can achieve great things. You can save the Jewish people. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know what it is you can do. The same for all of your viewers. They're all Mordechais, they're all Esthers. They can all do something. And if we all do it together, maybe we can somehow tackle this great enemy of the West and of Israel, who's caused us so much grief and so much despair.
Well, Rabbi Dunner, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Maayan. Thank you.
Thank you.